Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Santa Capricia. So today we are going to be concentrating on just one build, but it is a big build and it's also quite an important build because what I'm going to be doing is an interchange which will link the main north-south freeway, which is this one currently built, and the main east-west freeway. So it's going to be the interchange junction for those two freeways. So it's Interstate 12, which is what this one is, and Interstate 2, which is the east-west interchange. I've been messing around with the numbering system of these freeways, so some of the signs might be incorrect that you'll see in the video. I've changed them since, but doesn't really matter. The main thing to know is that this is probably one of the key or main interchanges for Santa Capricia because of these two arterial interstates that run first of all from the downtown north to the airport and also connect to Postilion, which is this second city or the second commercial area in Santa Capricia, and then Interstate 2, which is east-west arterial route, which connects the sort of suburbs surrounding Santa Capricia, as well as linking the port together. And the port is a very long, sort of straggly harbour front, which has got a long freeway that runs along parallel to it. So yes, what I'm really trying to say here is this interchange is a key connection or a key sort of transportation hub for the city, and I probably spent a good 4 or 5 hours working on this thing. And I'm not a big fan of doing these sort of builds. I don't particularly enjoy doing interchanges, but I did quite get into this one, and I think probably because it's a little bit different to most of them. It's quite a complex one, but it came out quite well. I was pleased with the results. And it was probably the first one that I've really gone into a lot of detail in terms of getting things to sort of work and look a bit more unique. I have in the past done simpler versions of these, sort of just more straightforward interchanges, as well as toyed with the idea of downloading them off the workshop, but I'm not against that. But just I guess because of the flexibility in making it your own design, you can make sure that you're in control of how it sits and works completely. And I'm a bit of a control freak, so I like to be in control of things like that. So I probably going forward will carry on making my own interchanges, but as I say, this one is certainly the one, if not the most important one in the city. So what we're doing here, we just got the basic road sort of network set out, and then I'm using PO mod just to add in some extra details of these big pillars that are moving the sort of default vanilla ones out the way and then putting these ones in because I just like the appearance of those better. The big sort of cylindrical columns I think look quite good going over the main freeway there. It's quite a complicated sort of network of roads, and I used an actual interchange in Dallas, and I just liked how that one worked, so I tried to replicate that one. There's no harm, I think, in plagiarizing some of these, real world details, especially things like interchanges, because they can be very complicated. And using a real world example and just sort of making it fit your city, I think is a good way to go. And really, this build was quite tricky. You can see I'm having to try and shoehorn these additional sort of main road avenues as well as the interchange itself into this area. So the interchange not only connects the two interstates, but it also connects to these main avenues because this area just to the right here of Interstate 2 is going to be another sort of commercial area, which is known as Chester. And that's just to the north of where the port will be. The port will be sort of just to the south of this junction. The other thing that I realised kind of halfway through the build was I didn't have a kind of north to east connection. I'd forgotten to add an actual spur or an off-ramp for that connection. And I realised that actually the junction I was using as an example, the one in Dallas, also didn't appear to have a that sort of connection either. So I don't think it matters too much, because what I want to do is add a separate spur which will connect to the east. So if you're coming from downtown, you've got a separate off-ramp or spur that then connects to the easterly direction for Interstate 2, and will also connect to the port. So there's a lot of kind of threading of roads to make them get to the right position, as you always do with interchanges, but particularly here, because I've got a lot of stuff going on. I've got the port that I need to connect to. That's going to be the major sort of part in this area where traffic is going to be heading towards, as well as obviously being an important sort of interchange between the two interstates. So yeah, there's a lot going on, and probably here I'm about two hours in maybe. I mean, I've edited this considerably, this video, and there was a lot of mucking about with the heights, getting everything to sort of look correct, not too steep. And this sort of this area here, I'm just sort of planting in these extra supports. I mean, they're not, it's just aesthetics more than anything. But I started to use the procedural objects mod considerably more here, and now with my current, I mean, this was about a week or two ago I did this build, and now my current work in the city, I'm using the PO mod a lot more. It's kind of becoming a go-to tool for a lot of the particularly the things I would have done before with props. Now I'm converting them and often editing them as PO, and then taking them into the city like that. So you will see as the video progresses that there'll be a lot more PO objects appearing, procedural objects appearing. And what I'm also going to do in a minute, once I've got this little sort of connection going in here, is also putting a railway line through the middle of all this as well. So I don't really make life easy for myself, but I wanted to try and get some additional sort of transportation connections in there, because often with these big freeway areas they take up so much space. So if you can wedge in other transportation connections like railways and so forth, then you can use the space more wisely, I guess. So this is the start of the railway now. It's a sort of 4-lane track, which will be a kind of freight line, I guess, predominantly, because it'll run towards where the port area is. And what I had to do is then thread it underneath the freeway there, and again moving the legs around. But it was quite a sort of satisfying build to do this. As I say, I don't particularly enjoy these interchanges, but this one I was quite enjoyed making. And I guess it's quite good because it'll just sort of, hopefully it'll motivate me to do some more of these sort of builds in the future as I progress with Santa Capricia. Okay, so this little concrete column here, I decided to edit this, change the colour and make it appear like it was part of the bridge structure for the railway. And it came out quite well. I mean, it's not exactly detailed, but it just gives the kind of visual impression of the bridges being supported there going across the interstate. So PO is really good tool to use if you can. In certain instances, I think it has its uses more than others, let's say. But I did decide to use it quite a lot for this interchange. What we're doing here is putting markings down, and these are also converted in PO. And I find that I'm using them. I'm using them the same as I would a normal decal prop, but I do tend to find it slightly easier to use it in PO. I don't know whether that's just me, as well as the fact that it doesn't count to your prop limit or your prop count. And this, what I've got here, which I hinted at in the previous video, is a whole collection of decals and props that I've converted into PO, which I can then grab. I can look at what I've got, and I can grab and copy them and then bring them into where the build is in the city. So it's a slightly odd way of doing it, but I think it's quite a good way of doing it in a way, because it means I can see what I've got, particularly with these decals. There's so many of them, and I've only probably converted maybe half, if that, of all the decals I've got, but they tend to be the ones I use more. So what I'm doing is I'm converting them into PO, and then obviously copy and pasting them and bringing them into the build area here. And the other thing is you can adjust them quite easily by raising them, so you can create a more sort of lighter decal, which you could do anyway with Move It, but again, I just find it easier to use with PO. And again, these little fences are just converted into PO, which means that I can actually edit those, and some of those I did edit in terms of the width and I think the height as well. I just sort of changed them a bit. And now the column that I was using for the railway bridge, I decided to reduce it down and change the colour, and just used it as a little sort of fence post, so that it gives the impression that it's part of the fence structure. And again, if you look at it close up, it doesn't look particularly detailed, but from a distance I think it sort of works quite nicely, really. So I'm getting really quite good results, I think, with PO, and it does really change how you use the game. I must admit, it's really giving the game a lot more flexibility for me, which is fantastic, because I do tend to sort of have my own kind of ideas on how this city will develop, and PO is a really important sort of element of my tool set, I guess. So you can see here just these little barriers again converted into PO, as are the signs, and the signs are PO assets, I think, so you can then edit those blank boards and add your own text to that, which again takes a little bit of getting used to, but once you've got the gist, it's quite flexible in what you can do. So I've been playing around with this, making my own signage, and I think that adds to the sort of realism quite nicely, and also gives your city a more of a kind of unique individuality somehow, because you've got these big signs now with those places that were just basically part of your concept, and they almost become a physical place now when you have the sign. So I quite like to do those signs. They take a long time. I do tend to have quite a few of them, but the end result is quite good, I think. And the other thing I find is a bit tricky is working out all the exits and the numbering and making sure everything marries through, as well as working out where your sort of directions are and everything. So this took ages to just working out where the off-ramps were going in terms of what places they were going to connect to. I almost had to do a map myself just to try and work out exactly where they were leading to. And here I'm editing the one of the sort of gantries, because I didn't have one that was wide enough to span this 4-lane Interstate, and I ended up making my own sort of PO version of it. But again, you know, it's something that you can now do, which I think is fantastic. And I can imagine using these gantries for other stuff. You could even use them for sort of industrial, you know, industrial props and things like that. You can add them to buildings, and yeah, I think the sky's the limit almost with changing things in PO. And I think, I mean, going forward, I think I'm going to be using PO now as a staple for the city, because it's just the flexibility it's giving me in terms of creating sort of unique details. I mean, you'll see in a minute some bespoke light or lamppost buttress details that I made. I used a bridge embankment and scaled it down, and then put the lampposts or the lights on top of that, and then attached it to the side of the freeway bridge, because there's nowhere really to put lampposts and lights there. And I thought, well, if I make my own little detail, then I've got that. Going forward, I can use that for all my other sort of bridges and, you know, freeways and things. So, I mean, this is the detail now what I was talking about. And, you know, I can only really do this in PO. I mean, unless I was lucky, I could get a prop that sort of fitted in terms of the scale. But with PO, it's so much easier to do this. And I think the end result came out quite well. And you'll see in the cinematics coming up how it all finally came together with the foliage and everything else. So yeah, that's pretty much this episode. Again, thank you very much for watching, and do subscribe and hit that like button if you enjoyed the video. I shall leave you with some cinematics, just showing the interchange. And I think maybe in the next episode I'm going to do a little bit more kind of old-fashioned city building, maybe get into some sort of residential areas. But until then, I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I shall bid you farewell and see you next time.